You ever get that gut feeling the moment someone moves into your neighborhood that they're gonna be a problem? Yeah, that was Nadine Stetson. She rolled into our lakeside community 2 years ago like she owned the place oversized sunglasses, yapping about bylaws, and practically foaming at the mouth when my kids dared to enjoy the lake behind our house. I live at the end of the cul-de-sac in a small community wrapped around a private lake. I've got 2 kids, Liam and Lily, who love to fish, swim, and paddleboard out back. It's our little slice of peace, Nadine. She's the HOA president, self-appointed tyrant, really, and she hates kids. Especially mine. It started small. First, she kindly requested that my kids not splash excessively near her dock, claiming it disturbed the lake's natural tranquility. Then came the passive-aggressive letters typed in bold Times New Roman, no less. But last week, she went full villain. I got home from work. I'm a mechanic, so I know when someone's trying to pull a fast one, and found Liam sitting on the porch, his fishing rod snapped in half. Lily was crying. Apparently, Nadine marched over while they were casting off the dock and told them they weren't allowed to use community water access without a permit. She then confiscated their rods and tossed them in the garbage, said she was enforcing a new rule. I marched straight to her house. "Nadine," I said, knocking hard enough to rattle her overpriced wind chimes. She opened the door with that fake Stepford smile. "Can I help you, Zachary? You trespassed. You took my kids' things and destroyed them. That's not a rule, that's harassment." She lifted her chin. "As HOA president, I have authority to amend usage guidelines. Children under 16 must be supervised by an adult when using community lake property. It's for safety." "Funny," I said. "The dock behind my house isn't community property." "It's on my deed." She waved a copy of the HOA's rules like it was the Constitution. "The lake is community property, Zachary. Your dock touches it. Therefore, it falls under our jurisdiction." I stared at her. "You've lost your damn mind." That night I went online, pulled my property survey. Read every line of the HOA charter. And what I found made my blood boil and my lips curl into an idea. See, Nadine was right, the lake was community property. But there was a clause buried in the original developer's documents. Homeowners could build structures on the lake as long as they didn't obstruct navigable access or harm wildlife. I had just enough shoreline to install something creative. 2 days later, I started building. "What are you doing?" asked my neighbor Greg as I hauled lumber down to the water. "Just building a floating fence," I said. "About 70 feet long. Gonna float a nice little boundary around my section of lake, completely legal. Just needs to be marked and anchored." He raised both eyebrows. "You serious?" I nodded. "If Nadine wants to enforce lake access guidelines, then I'm just making sure my kids stay on our side." By the end of the week, the floating fence was done, pontoons, netting, and reflective buoys with signs reading "Private use only, do not enter." It formed a perfect crescent off my shoreline, snipping off the path between Nadine's dock and the rest of the lake. The morning after I finished, I was sipping coffee when I heard her shriek echoing across the water. I stepped outside. "What the hell is this, Zachary?" Nadine was standing on her dock, red-faced and furious. "You've blocked my kayak route," I waved. "Oh, sorry, you'll have to go the long way." "You know, through community water access." "You can't do this." "Actually, I can," I said. "Clause D, Section 7 of the original developer agreement. You might want to read it. It's the one document you don't seem to have memorized." She stormed off, muttering about lawyers. But I knew what was coming next, and I was ready. By the following Monday, Nadine had summoned the HOA board to her living room like it was a war council. 3 of them showed up: Phil, who always looked like he'd rather be anywhere else; Sherry, who never spoke unless it was to agree with Nadine; and Carl, who once filed an official complaint because someone's Halloween decorations disrupted his emotional state. I watched them from my driveway as they trickled in, clutching manila folders and notepads like they were preparing for trial. I wasn't worried. I had copies of every relevant statute, the property survey, and a notarized letter from the county planning office confirming that my floating boundary didn't violate local ordinances. Still, I didn't like the idea of being outnumbered, So that evening, I invited a few neighbors over for coffee and pie, just a casual get-together with a side of strategic planning. Greg came, along with his wife Dana, and a couple from 2 houses down, Marcus and Janelle. They'd all had their own run-ins with Nadine over the past year. "What's our next move?" Marcus asked between bites of peach cobbler. "We don't let her control the narrative," I said. "She's going to paint me as some rogue homeowner who's blocking access to the lake. But if we show up organized with documents and witnesses, we make it clear this isn't just about me. It's about her abusing authority." Dana leaned forward. "You think she'll try to get the HOA to fine you? She'll try something bigger," I said. "She's not the type to go small when her ego's bruised." I was right. 2 days later, I got a letter slipped under my door, not mailed, not in the HOA's usual template. It was typed on plain white paper, sealed in a flimsy envelope, and unsigned, but I recognized the stiff, bureaucratic language. According to the notice, I was in violation of community harmony standards and had until the end of the week to remove obstructions from shared water space. Failure to comply would result in escalating enforcement measures. I walked the letter over to the sheriff's substation the next morning and handed it to Deputy Harlow, who'd lived in the area for 20 years and had zero patience for nonsense. "This looks like an unofficial warning," he said, flipping it over. "No signature, no HOA letterhead, no citation number. That's not how fines work. She's trying to scare me into compliance." Harlow scanned the paper again, then raised an eyebrow. "This line about escalating enforcement, what does she mean by that?" "No idea. But that's the part that worries me." He handed it back. "Document everything. If she steps over the line, call me directly." I didn't have to wait long. That Friday, while I was at work, someone trespassed onto my property and tried to dismantle the floating fence. They didn't get far, just cut through one of the anchor ropes and slashed 2 of the boys, but they left behind muddy footprints, a bent utility knife, and a broken garden stake. My security camera caught part of it, a figure in a hoodie and gloves moving fast, looking over their shoulder every few seconds. I showed the footage to Deputy Harlow that evening. "Looks like someone's gotten desperate," he muttered. "Can we press charges? If we can ID them, yes." This counts as vandalism and trespassing. I posted stills from the footage to our neighborhood forum. No names, just a polite message. "To whoever decided to damage my property today, smile, you were caught on camera. The footage has been turned over to law enforcement. Any further attempts will result in prosecution." That lit a brush fire. By the next morning, the forum was buzzing. People who'd stayed quiet before started speaking up. Nadine had yelled at a toddler for picking flowers near a mailbox. She'd fined a retired vet for painting his porch without pre-approval. She'd tried to ban solar lights because they attracted moths. One neighbor, Rachel, posted a screenshot of a text Nadine had accidentally sent to the wrong person. It was meant for Sherry, clearly, but she'd sent it to Rachel instead. It read, "If this doesn't work, we'll just say the fence is a hazard. Maybe someone should accidentally trip near it." That was the tipping point. Greg helped me draft a formal complaint to the county HOA Oversight Board. We included the threatening letter, the security footage, the text screenshot, and a signed petition from 15 homeowners requesting an external audit of the HOA's enforcement practices. We also filed a police report for the vandalism. Nadine's response: she doubled down. That weekend, she hosted an emergency HOA meeting at the community rec center. The email invitation she sent out claimed it was to restore peace and order to the neighborhood. I decided to go. So did half the neighborhood. The room was packed. Nadine stood at the front, flanked by her loyal trio. She wore a navy pantsuit and an expression that suggested she was about to scold a room full of kindergarteners. "As many of you know," she began, "we've had an unfortunate situation with a homeowner who has chosen to erect an obstruction in our shared lake space without proper approval or consideration for the community." Murmurs rose from the crowd. She held up her hand. "I understand emotions are high. But we must enforce rules consistently. That is why the board has voted to issue a mandatory removal order. If the obstruction is not taken down within 72 hours, the HOA will arrange for its removal and charge the homeowner accordingly." I raised my hand. She hesitated, then nodded. Yes, Zachary. Did you receive legal clearance to issue that order? Because from what I understand, you don't have jurisdiction over structures that don't violate the shoreline buffer agreement. She curled her lip. This isn't about legal loopholes. It's about community standards. It's about abuse of power, I said. And we've filed a request for an audit, along with a report of vandalism tied to someone on this board. That got everyone's attention. A few people gasped. Carl looked like he wanted to melt into his folding chair. Nadine tried to move on, but the damage was done. People began asking questions, hard ones. Why weren't board meeting minutes being published? Why had fines increased without notice? Why were some violations enforced while others were ignored? The meeting devolved fast. By the end of the night, 3 residents had demanded Nadine's resignation, and someone, bless their bold little heart, stood up and asked if the HOA could be temporarily dissolved pending investigation. That Monday, 2 county inspectors showed up with clipboards and cameras. They spent the day reviewing HOA records, walking the lake perimeter, and interviewing homeowners. Nadine tried to follow them around, but they asked her to wait inside. That evening, I got a call from Deputy Harlow. "You'll want to hear this," he said. We lifted a print off the knife. "Matches someone with a prior misdemeanor for destruction of property. Sherry," my hand tightened around the phone. "She vandalized my fence. Looks that way. We're issuing a summons." The next morning, Sherry's porch light was off and her car was gone. A week later, a small sign appeared in her yard. For sale by owner. It wasn't over yet. But for the first time in months, I could feel the tide turning. Nadine wasn't untouchable anymore, and my kids. They were back out on the lake, paddling inside the floating crescent I'd built, safe and smiling. The first real break came on a Wednesday afternoon when I answered the door to find a woman in a gray blazer holding a county badge and a thick folder. She introduced herself as Investigator Hall from the Department of Residential Communities. Her eyes immediately drifted to the lake behind me. "I'm conducting a deeper inquiry into the complaint your neighborhood filed. Would you be available to walk me through the sequence of events?" I led her down to the dock, pointing out the repaired anchor rope and noting where the damage had occurred. Her phone was already recording. "Has anyone from the HOA attempted to contact you directly since the complaint was filed?" she asked. "Only Nadine, and only through that phony letter she never signed," I said. "But she's been careful not to put anything on official HOA letterhead since the audit started." She scribbled something into her notes. "That matches other patterns we're seeing." "Other patterns." Hall turned toward me, flipping open the folder. "You're not the only neighborhood under this HOA management umbrella. Your HOA board is technically part of a larger management collective. They're registered under a company that's been flagged in 3 other counties for improper registration of fines, unlicensed enforcement actions, and in one case, misappropriation of community funds." That stopped me cold. "You're telling me this is bigger than just Nadine?" She appears to be the local enforcer, but the structure above her is where this becomes criminal. "We're working with the county attorney's office now." I rubbed the back of my neck, stunned. "Can I help?" She nodded. "Gather any communication your neighbors have from the board involving fines, permit rejections, or denial of appeals, especially if there are discrepancies between what's written and what's in the official charter. We're building a fraud case. And it's moving fast." That night, I met with Marcus and Dana again, this time in Greg's garage. We spread out letters, emails, and screenshots across a folding table. It didn't take long to spot the pattern. Dana had been fined for a fence height violation that wasn't in the bylaws. Marcus had been charged a late fee. Even though his payment cleared on time, he had a time-stamped bank record to prove it. Greg had 2 denial notices for solar panel permits, both citing a property uniformity clause that didn't exist in any official documents. "I knew something was off," Dana muttered, "but I thought maybe it was just incompetence." "No," I said, tapping the letters. "This is deliberate. They're fabricating violations and pocketing the payments, and no one questions it because they're scared of retaliation." Greg looked up. "What do we do with this?" "We give it to Hall, and we go public." The next morning, I posted a notice on the community forum about a resident meeting at the rec center that Friday. No board members, just homeowners. I sent a private message to Hall, letting her know we'd have documentation and testimonies ready. Friday came, and every folding chair in the rec center was filled. People stood along the walls, quiet but alert. I stepped to the front with a stack of printed documents and cleared my throat. I want to thank everyone for coming. What I'm about to show you has been confirmed by a county investigator. This isn't just about bad leadership, it's about fraud. I held up a letter from Marcus's file. This is a fabricated fee notice. The payment went to an account that isn't registered with our HOA's official budget. Murmurs rippled through the room. I passed out copies of the documents, highlighting the inconsistencies. Dana read hers aloud, voice shaking with anger. I paid $200 for a violation that doesn't exist, and I was threatened with a lien when I questioned it. Someone in the back stood up. It was Helen, a retired teacher who hadn't spoken at a meeting in over a year. They fined me for cutting down a dead tree. Said I didn't have a removal permit, even though I had a letter from the arborist. I paid it because I didn't want the stress, but now I want it back. Hall arrived halfway through the meeting. She stood at the back, listening quietly and taking notes. When the last resident finished sharing their story, she stepped forward. My office has opened a formal investigation into this HOA and its parent management company. Based on what you've provided, we have probable cause to believe funds were fraudulently collected and misused. We are coordinating with the county prosecutor and the state licensing board. Someone asked what that meant. It means the people responsible could face charges, and you may have grounds for restitution. The room erupted in conversation. For the first time in months, people weren't whispering they were planning. The next morning, Nadine lost it. She marched down my driveway in workout clothes and a visor, fists clenched, cheeks flushed. I was in the garage cleaning up tools. "You think you're clever?" she snapped. "This little rebellion of yours is going to cost you." I didn't look up. "You mean like the fake fines you've been handing out?" She stepped closer. "You've poisoned this community with paranoia." "No," I said calmly. "You did that yourself." "I just gave people the facts. You're going to regret this." I finally turned to face her. "That's the third time you've made a threat. You're being recorded right now. Anything else you'd like to say for the file?" She froze, eyes flicking to the camera mounted above the garage door. "I hope you enjoy your little fence," she hissed. "It won't last." She stormed off before I could reply. Later that day, Hall called with an update. Law enforcement had executed a search warrant at the main office of the management company tied to our HOA. Computers, files, and banking records were seized. "They found a shell account," she said. "It's where many of the violation payments were redirected. The account was controlled by two individuals, one of them local." "Nadine." "No, Carl," I blinked. "Carl." He could barely stay awake during meetings. He's been quietly collecting payments through a separate portal. Nadine issued the fines, and he processed them behind the scenes. "We're issuing warrants tomorrow." I walked down to the lake that evening and sat at the edge of the dock, watching the sun cast gold across the water. Liam and Lily paddled near the floating boundary, laughing as they raced toward the far end. For once, my chest didn't feel tight. That weekend, sheriff's deputies arrived in unmarked vehicles and calmly escorted Carl from his home. He didn't resist, just looked dazed like he couldn't believe the game was up. Nadine wasn't arrested, but she was served with a cease and desist order prohibiting her from acting in any official capacity on behalf of the HOA. The management company's license was suspended pending further review. The county appointed a temporary administrator to oversee the neighborhood until a new board could be fairly elected. I wasn't planning to run, but Greg was, and so was Helen. A week later, I removed the floating fence not because I had to, but because I didn't need it anymore. The lake was ours again, not just mine, everyone's. The kids still fish off the dock, I still keep the security cameras running. And Nadine, she's still around, but no one listens to her anymore. She walks the neighborhood in silence, sunglasses on, head down, and the rest of us. We're finally standing up straight. The Monday after Carl's arrest, Investigator Hall returned to the neighborhood, this time with a county prosecutor and a pair of plainclothes officers. They didn't knock on doors. They went straight to the HOA's former records room, what used to be a dusty, locked closet off the rec center hallway, and began cataloging boxes. Within an hour, they'd wheeled out 4 full carts of files and a desktop tower wrapped in a chain of evidence tags. By then, the gossip had reached a simmer. People weren't just curious anymore, they were angry. Not the kind of quiet resentment that simmers under the surface, but the sharper kind, the kind that makes people finally show up to meetings and start asking for receipts. And they got them. The temporary administrator, a no-nonsense woman named Marla with a clipboard thicker than a phone book, called a general assembly for that Friday evening. The rec center had never been so packed. Folding chairs ran out before the first 15 minutes. People stood in the back, arms crossed, waiting for answers. Marla didn't waste time. The county forensic team has reviewed the HOA's financial activity over the last 3 years, she said. The findings are serious. Funds totaling over $78,000 were siphoned into private accounts unrelated to HOA maintenance, legal expenses, or authorized improvements. Gasps echoed through the room. They also found unauthorized software used to generate fine notices. These were not approved by board vote nor logged in official meeting minutes. In plain terms, many of you were defrauded. No one spoke. The silence was too heavy. Marla took a breath. The county prosecutor has issued formal charges against Carl Dennison for wire fraud, embezzlement, and falsifying financial records. Additional charges may follow pending evidence review. Someone near the back muttered something under their breath, and the room's energy shifted. Not quite panic. Not quite fury, something colder, focused. I know this sounds like a lot, Marla continued, but we're not here to dwell on what went wrong. We're here to rebuild. The county will oversee a full election next month. Anyone interested in running for a board seat will undergo a background check and training on HOA law before their name appears on the ballot. Daner raised her hand. What happens with the money that was stolen? We're working with the district attorney's office to seize assets from the fraudulent accounts. If successful, restitution checks will be issued directly to affected homeowners. Someone let out a low whistle. Marla didn't smile. Also, she added, we've reopened past violation appeals. If you paid a fine for something not backed by a legitimate bylaw, file a claim. We'll review and, where appropriate, issue refunds. By the time the meeting ended, people weren't just relieved, they were engaged. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years exchanged numbers. Plans were made to repaint the rec center, fix the dock lights, and finally replace the broken volleyball net that had been pending approval since the previous summer. I stayed behind to help stack chairs. As I lifted the last one, Marla approached. You did more than just file a complaint, she said. You rallied people, that matters, I shrugged. Didn't plan on it, just wanted my kids to fish in peace. She nodded toward the lake. They will. But we need people like you to make sure it stays that way. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. The next few weeks moved quickly. A work crew arrived to repaint the HOA signage, removing Nadine's name from the board listing. The mailbox kiosks got power washed. Even the walking trail, long neglected and overgrown at the northern edge of the lake, got cleared and mulched. But the real change came in conversation. Helen started a weekly coffee morning under the picnic canopy. Marcus set up a community tool library in his garage. Greg printed out free copies of the rewritten bylaws and walked them door to door. People didn't just wave anymore, they stopped, talked, planned. Nadine, meanwhile, kept her head down. Her once daily patrols vanished, her porch lights stayed off. Her kayak, usually visible from 3 houses away, hadn't moved in over a month. Then, one morning, a moving truck pulled into her driveway. I watched from across the street as 2 men loaded boxes marked kitchen and office. Nadine stood by the mailbox, arms crossed, hair pinned back in a tight twist. She never looked toward the lake, never looked toward my house. Just before the truck door closed, she handed the foreman an envelope. He climbed into the cab without reading it. By sunset, the house was empty. I didn't feel triumphant, just relieved. A week later, the county released a full report. In addition to Carl's charges, The management company that oversaw 5 other HOAs, including ours, had been fined heavily and disbanded. Multiple employees were under investigation, but the part that hit hardest. In a footnote near the end of the report, the county confirmed that one of Nadine's actions had violated a state-level statute specifically, the one concerning impersonation of a public official. Her homemade violation letters, issued without board vote or proper documentation, bore phrasing typically reserved for municipal citations. That crossed a line. She was arrested 2 days later, not in handcuffs, not in front of flashing lights. Just 2 plainclothes officers walking her out of a downtown cafe, gently but firmly. I only knew because Hall called me personally. "She's being charged with unauthorized enforcement of municipal codes," Hall said. "It won't carry prison time, but it's permanent. She'll never be allowed to serve on an HOA board again, anywhere in the state." "Good," I said. "That's all anyone wanted, accountability." "There's more," she added. "The prosecutor intends to use this case as precedent. Homeowner harassment through fraudulent enforcement is about to get a lot harder to hide." I thanked her and hung up. That night, for the first time in a long time, I sat on the dock and let myself breathe. The lake was still, no tension in the air. Just the soft laps of water against the posts, the faint chirp of crickets in the reeds, and the flicker of my kids' headlamps bouncing across the water as they reeled in their lines. Liam caught a bass. Lily caught something that turned out to be a very aggressive turtle. I laughed harder than I had in months. The floating fence was long gone, but its purpose had been served. It had drawn a line not through the water, but through the illusion of control that had gripped our neighborhood for too long. And when people saw that line, they remembered they had choices. Rights, voices. At the next board election, Helen won a seat, so did Greg, and me. I took Marla's advice and ran for the last open position. We won unanimously. We held our first meeting under the open sky, lawn chairs in a circle, no suits, no gavel. Just neighbors, finally in charge of their own neighborhood. And as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting that familiar shimmer across the lake, I looked around at the people beside me. No fear, no silence, just community, exactly what it should have been all along.